Welcome back to C2C Journal. Today we're exploring a lesser-known chapter of the Freedom Convoy saga, the legal aftermath faced by ordinary truckers who participated in the 2022 Ottawa protests. Joining us here today is Donna Laframboise, an independent journalist and photographer, former vice president of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, founding member of the National Post, and the author of 5 books. In her latest essay, 3 Weeks in Ottawa, 3 Weeks in Court, the untold story of Canada's other Freedom Convoy truckers, Donna sheds light on the severe legal repercussions these individuals endured. Donna, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Wonderful. So let's dive right into it. Take us back to 2022. What happened that led the trucker convoy to commence?
So the main point for the truckers was that our prime minister decided to bring in a vaccine mandate for any trucker who wished to cross the border into the U.S. Or who wished to return from the U.S. probably is more precise. So these truckers had been working for 2 years during the pandemic under some very uncomfortable conditions, and we were very grateful. I think most Canadians for the fact that they were continuing to supply our hospitals and our grocery stores, and then suddenly it was decided that if they weren't vaccinated, they posed a public health risk. And so there were suddenly a lot of truckers who were not going to be able to cross the border, not going to be able to do their job anymore. They were going to be thrown out of income. And you don't do that to people lightly. So that was sort of the spark. Because the 2 people who started the convoy, 2 truckers, they were both cross-border truckers, and suddenly they're worried about their own putting food on the table for their own family. Chris Barber has a small company and had employees, and suddenly those employees were going to be out of work. So that was the spark. But the broader issue was that it had been almost 2 years, and our pandemic restrictions were not going away. In fact, they were getting worse in some cases. So, in January of 2022, some people have imperfect memories, and they say now, oh, the restrictions were disappearing. The trucker convoy was not necessary. That was not, in fact, the case. So after Christmas, in January 2022, only 1 province sent kids back to school on schedule. There were all kinds of new measures coming in Quebec. They suddenly said you can't go into a liquor store, you can't go into a Costco, you can't go into a Walmart if you aren't vaccinated. So so in many ways things were getting worse, and there was no indication of when things might relax. When ordinary life might come back, normal life. And people were just saying, enough is enough. We've done this for 2 years. People are being cooperative, but enough is enough. We have to move on. And this virus, can't be allowed to destroy everything that's wonderful about our country, and it can't be allowed to destroy our economy. So that was sort of why it happened and why it was so massively supported by so many Canadians from coast to coast.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a huge movement, and I hope we never forget it, because, I mean, they just made such an impact on the trajectory of all these restrictions. So we're very thankful for that. So you mentioned many of the participants faced charges for very minor offenses. Can you elaborate on the nature of these charges and what their implications were?
So yes, so we heard during that time from the media, as well as from people who were sort of mouthing off on social media that they were trying to overthrow the government, and this was terrorism, and there was violence. Well, to my knowledge, there were never any charges, no violence charges of any kind, no terrorism charges, no overthrowing the government charges. So what people are facing mostly is mischief, and the standard things seem to be, well, we're going to throw a resisting arrest at you as well. We're going to throw obstructing a police at you as well. And when we saw what happened to Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, they were facing 6 and 7 charges and were only convicted of 1 out of 6 and 2 out of 7. So the charges are very minor. These people don't have criminal records. These are not charges involving violence. But so, a lawyer friend of mine would call these chicken shit charges. They're not serious.
Yeah.
And they are exactly the kind of charges that you would expect, that especially as time advances and we get further and further away from those events, they should be withdrawn. They should be dismissed. The people should say, the Crown attorneys should say, it's been a long time. Let's just move on. Let's stop persecuting people who really, their only real offense was that they peacefully protested government measures.
Which we should be able to do here in Canada without being penalized for it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you differentiate between the legal proceedings against protest leaders and those against everyday participants, in your opinion?
Well, I think they're facing the same charges. There's been a lot of attention, particularly from the mainstream media on the leaders. Chris Barber and Tamara Lich. And the rest of the truckers are sort of making their way through the court system, and no one's paying attention. We don't have any list even of who was charged and when their court date is. So those people have been kind of just off on their own and facing these legal struggles on their own. And so, one of the gentlemen in the book I've written, Thank You Truckers, Canada's Heroes and Those Who Helped Them, he's from Nova Scotia. And he came up in a vintage Mack, an old truck that got a lot of attention while it was parked in downtown Ottawa. And he was charged with mischief. And the court proceedings have dragged out for more than 3 years. So this man has been back and forth at his own expense from Nova Scotia more than a dozen times.
Oh, wow.
And it's important to understand that in Ontario and elsewhere in the country, there's a shortage of judges. There's a shortage of prosecutors. And according to the CBC last year, they were saying most criminal charges aren't even making it into the courtroom right now because of this backup, a backlog and shortage. And so, and according to the CBC, even sexual assault charges are being dropped and withdrawn because of this backlog. But the people running the Ottawa courthouse have still continued to pursue these truckers for stuff that is, it's so minor. As I say, these aren't criminals. They don't have criminal records. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense. In another case, there's a gentleman from Quebec. He's a heavy machine operator. And he too, it's been through he's been through the court process. It's taken 3 years. He finally, his trial ended in April of this year for a mischief charge and an obstruct police charge. And he has to wait until September for his verdict. 5 months of waiting on tenterhooks, wondering what's going to happen, because the judge has decided to take 5 months to write a verdict for a mischief charge. And the other horrible thing that's happening is that when people get acquitted, when the police arrest someone and the person is protesting, the police will say, you're going to have your day in court. Tell it to the judge, explain it. You'll have a chance to tell your side of the story then. Well, in a number of cases associated with the Freedom Convoy, these people go to court, they go through all the stress, and they have to raise money to pay for lawyers. This is all very, if you're not a criminal, this is all very bewildering to you. So they go to court, they have their day in court. A judge who presumably is very literate about legal matters acquits them. You'd think that would be the end of the matter. These are mischief charges, right? But no, the Crown attorneys in that Ottawa courthouse are appealing mischief acquittals. So you go through all of this, you have your day in court, you get acquitted, and then the Crown continues to persecute you and says, we're going to appeal that acquittal. We're going to appeal that sentence. So for mischief charges, I think this is ridiculous. And I'm not sure it's ever happened in any other context. It really, really, there's something very wrong going on here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like they're picking on them in a way. And it just sounds like a never-ending nightmare for these
Absolutely. Absolutely.
people. Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
once you're told you're acquitted, now your lawyer is telling you, well, you're not yet. We have to wait 30 days because the Crown has the 30-day period to file an appeal. And in one case I'm aware of, that Crown attorney waited to the last afternoon of the last day of that 30 days to file the appeal. So, it's starting to look like people are being deliberately cruel as well.
Mhm.
And that is not the role of a Crown attorney. The Crown attorney is supposed to represent society, not be this, not be politicized.
Absolutely. Can you share some other specific stories that encapsulate the challenges faced by these truckers during their legal battles? I know you mentioned a few of the stories, but if you can talk about some others, that would be wonderful.
Well, there's Harold Jonker, who with his brothers own Jonker Trucking, and they're from the Niagara area in Ontario. And that small company, family-owned company, brought 12 trucks to Ottawa, and some of them were parked downtown, some of them were not. And they were all very peaceful and they behaved very responsibly. And they're a very Christian family, and they leave Ottawa and they go home. And more than a year later, 14, 15 months after they leave Ottawa, Harold Jonker, the sort of senior owner, is now told that he's being charged criminally. I think it was 4 criminal charges. So you can go to a protest, you can behave peacefully, you
Mhm.
can go home, and a year later, the police can decide that you did something that warrants numerous criminal charges. And then you have to hire a lawyer. Well, first you have to turn yourself in and you have to get fingerprinted and you have to hire a lawyer. Is this what the court system is supposed to be doing? This is crazy. This is just crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, it's supposed to be for real criminals that do horrible things and truly hurt people, um, not peaceful protests. I mean, I remember watching the protests on TV and people were just gathered together singing "Oh Canada" and drinking hot chocolate. So
Yeah.
these charges are just, it's absolutely crazy.
And let me just mention one other thing that I find very disturbing. And as a journalist, I have covered the courts for many decades. And one of the things that is supposed to happen in our system is you are supposed to get access to a lawyer.
Mhm.
Okay, our Constitution, Section 10 of the Charter of Rights, says that you are entitled to speak to and counsel
Mhm.
in without delay after you have been arrested.
Mhm.
And in at least 2 cases that I'm aware of, they never got their phone call.
Mhm.
And so in if things were working the way they should, the judge should just dismiss those charges immediately. The minute we hear that they never got their phone call, that should be the end of the matter. Instead, we've had one judge say, well, yes, there was a significant delay and it's supposed to be without delay, but I think the police did their best under these unusual circumstances.
Mhm.
Pardon me? Pardon me? You
Mhm.
do not deny people access to a lawyer, and that's what happened. And in another gentleman's case, I have actually seen the video from the police processing trailer. And that gentleman sits there and very calmly for about 30 minutes says, I want to speak to a lawyer. I am in no fit state at the moment. He was being examined actually by a paramedic because
Mhm.
he was having some medical issues. I'm in no fit state to make a decision. I would like to speak to my lawyer. I would like to understand this paper that you are urging me to sign.
Mhm.
He says that over and over and over again. And meanwhile, there are 10 police officers. He's sitting there. He's 5'3". He's got handcuffs on. He's sitting there. And there are about 10 police officers in this trailer urging him to sign this paper.
Mhm.
And he says, no, I'd like to speak to a lawyer. He never got a chance to speak to a lawyer. They never gave him that opportunity. That's not how the police are supposed to behave. And the idea that this gentleman is still enmeshed in the courts is it's wrong. It's really wrong.
It really is, absolutely. I'm not sure if you know where all these legal cases stand now or what progress has been made so far, but can you talk about where some of these cases are and if, there is the light at the end of the tunnel for some of these truckers?
So some of them have gone through the system and they've been acquitted,
Mhm.
which is wonderful. But they've spent $45,000 on legal fees to get
Wow.
there.
Mhm.
So one gentleman from northern BC, that's what happened to him,
Mhm.
$40,000. In another case, a young man from around London, Ontario, who is a trucker, but who went to Ottawa with his pickup truck and a trailer, sort of B2B support, part of the support network that formed there, which was just amazing to
Mhm.
see in action. So he decided that he wanted to be an example of civil disobedience. So when he heard that the police line was forming and that the crackdown was beginning, he ran over and he laid down in the snow very
Mhm.
passively. And then he was arrested. And when he was arrested, he didn't resist, but he didn't help either. This is just classic civil disobedience stuff.
Mhm.
And the Crown attorney thought that he should go to jail for 6 months for doing that.
For laying in the snow.
Yes, yes. Peaceful, absolutely peaceful civil disobedience. The Crown Attorney started by asking for 6 months. And then it was, well, okay, 2 months. And then I think the next, this is all happening over a couple of years. It's, well, house arrest. And eventually things resolved because he held firm rather than giving up and taking a not attractive settlement. So
Yeah.
finally, the settlement was okay. You're going to sign a peace bond for a year. Well, because he's a perfectly peaceful guy, that's not hard and you're going to write a 100-word essay. That's what it was called by the prosecutor about the difference between peaceful protest and criminal mischief. Well, 100 words is about one paragraph.
Right.
Uh, so eventually, if he keeps the peace bond and he wrote the essay, then he will end up with no criminal record. So that was another resolution. So those are the good, and in other cases, people have been, the gentleman from Nova Scotia in the vintage Mack truck, he was acquitted of obstructing police because he in no way was uncooperative. The officer on the stand said that he was extremely compliant. So what was the obstruct police even there for, right? Like, why was it even there as a
Mhm.
charge? Um, but he was convicted of mischief. And in his case, the sentence is a conditional discharge. If he performs some community work and he pays $100 surcharge, and he's on probation for 6 months, if all of that works out, then he too will come out of this with no criminal record. Um, but the 30 days haven't expired yet in his case. So it could be that the Crown Attorney appeals either his sentence or his acquittal on obstructing police. So it's not over yet for him. Even so, and in Harold Jonker's case, who was charged a year later, more than a year later, they had a very no nonsense judge, is my understanding, and the judge just said, "There's nothing here. The Crown has not made the case, not remotely so." My understanding of what happened in court is that no one could even identify Mr. Jonker. Um, from the prosecution side, they certainly had no complaints about behavior that he himself had committed. They just didn't like the convoy. That's my understanding of what went on in court from secondhand. So again, he was acquitted. He's okay, but a lot of money was spent on lawyers to get to that point.
Yeah. And on top of the money spent, just the effects on your mental health and just your overall health and well-being. And, these people still have families to feed, right? And so it just sounds like it is long overdue for these cases to be dismissed and to let these people just live their lives.
Yes, yes. And my understanding is that in places like New Zealand, the government has just taken a decision. We're not going to pursue any more COVID era cases. We're going to just let it drop. We're
Mhm.
going to move on, and we're not going to do that anymore. We haven't decided that in Canada. I'm not sure why, and actually, let me tell you about one other gentleman. So he had, the stress of being charged. His mom was ill. He's visiting her. He's going to court. He has a stroke. He has the first stroke,
Mhm.
and court keeps dragging on. On one occasion, he actually has another mini stroke inside the courtroom.
Oh, wow.
They have to adjourn. They have to call an ambulance. And at that point, he's facing mischief charges. You think compassionate grounds.
Mhm.
Let's just stop this. Let's just
Mhm.
stop. But no, they still are continuing. And so now this gentleman, when he's in court, he has a service dog who sits beside him
Mhm.
and to help him manage his stress, and this is the gentleman who is waiting 5 months for his verdict from the judge, someone who's got medical issues that
Mhm.
are stress related. They're certainly not being helped by the stress of what he's going through. And rather than withdrawing and being compassionate, we as a society are still pursuing him.
Mhm. Absolutely crazy. How do you think the treatment of these truckers reflect on the balance between government authority and individual civil liberties in Canada?
Well, I think what we learned through COVID and through what's happened with these truckers is that our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is worth nothing. It's not worth the paper it's written on.
Mhm.
That is a horrible, horrible thing conclusion to come to. But that's the I think the obvious conclusion. So government does not feel there it has any. Government feels like it can do whatever it wants. And one of the things that's very important to remember about the trucker protest is that no government official from at the federal level actually sat down and talked to these people. Some of them had driven thousands of kilometers across the country. They had spent thousands of dollars on fossil fuel in the middle of the winter, and they had endured some horrible weather and some horrible driving conditions to get to Ottawa. All they wanted was to be heard and to be recognized. And our federal government, which meets with lobbyists dozens of times every month in this country, refused to sit down at a table and listen to these people. And what does that tell you about the state of our democracy? Terrible, just terrible.
Terrible, absolutely. In your view, what was the significance of the Freedom Convoy for Canadians, and what lessons do you think it offers to Canadians today?
Well, my book is a book about the ordinary Canadians who participated in the Freedom Convoy. So I
Mhm.
have 20 truckers, and then I have a whole number of other people who helped the truckers in various ways.
Mhm.
And and the truckers gave people hope at a time when people were in despair. It was winter time in Canada. We had just gone through another holiday season where COVID had ruined things, and people were feeling very desperate, some of them. And the truckers were told again and again, "You saved my life. You
Mhm.
saved my life," because I was just losing hope.
Mhm.
So psychologically, the truckers represented what so many Canadians were feeling, and no one had expressed. If a politician could have said those things, senior lawyers could have said those things, retired prime ministers could have said those things. No one was saying them, and so it was the truckers who gave voice to those feelings, and they did change this trajectory. You
Mhm.
know, Suddenly, the mandates started dropping. Suddenly, mask mandates started coming down. Suddenly, it was like, oh, you can go to restaurants now. You can go back into Walmart.
Mhm.
All of that happened after the truckers hit the road and not before. So the truckers changed the trajectory here in Canada, but also internationally, because lots of people looked at what the truckers were doing in Canada and said, "Oh my, those polite, sweet, patient Canadians, even they've had enough,"
Mhm.
and they started their own little own protests. And in New Zealand, it was quite extensive. It was summer there, but they camped out outside the Parliament buildings for weeks as well. There were so it kind of sparked this international
Movement.
rebellion of the ordinary person against all of these government restrictions that just were going on and on. And I like to say that Canada was cool again, and because of what ordinary people did, not because of what any government official did or sports person did, just because Canada was cool because of ordinary folk. And that's amazing. That's a
It
great moment
absolutely
in
is.
history.
Yeah, a huge thank you to the truckers. I mean, they did, something so amazing for Canadians, and we must never forget that. And finally, after writing this wonderful essay, what key insight or lesson do you hope your readers take away from your piece?
So the people who went and protested put themselves on the line, and some of them have paid a very big price for doing that. And they deserve our support, and they deserve our gratitude. And that protest was amazing because it wasn't just the truckers, it was all of those Canadians who helped the truckers. And sometimes it was by waving a flag on an overpass, and sometimes it was by donating some money online. And in Manitoba, the Hutterites, who are usually very aloof and do not get involved, fed the truckers. And then there were many, many people who came to Ottawa and cooked outside in the freezing cold for 3 weeks to feed the truckers. So it was that whole event was amazing because there was so many Canadians who were caring for each other and who just wanted to help and wanted to make a contribution. And it was a beautiful moment. And it was also a life-changing experience for some people and a very spiritual experience for some people. So it was, it's an event that really, really deserves its place in the official history of Canada.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Donna, thank you so much for shedding light on the untold stories of those who face severe legal consequences for participating in the Freedom Convoy protests. Your essay offered a very powerful reminder of the costs associated with challenging government policy and the importance of safeguarding our civil liberties. To read Donna's full essay, 3 weeks in Ottawa, 3 weeks in court, the untold story of Canada's other Freedom Convoy truckers, please click the link in the bio in the description below. And again, Donna, thank you so much for being here. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time.